Thank you to Vermont Studio Center for collaborating with Green Mountains Review and Solidarity for Unbridled Labor, who are the group of artists who produced the visuals and the design as well. This has been a long-standing dream of my friend Michael Jagger, who is the head designer over at Solidarity of Unbridled Labor. And I were thinking about this for a long time, and then suddenly we realized we could do it. And that became very exciting. And we started it before COVID, and we had hoped perhaps we could have art shows and poetry readings across the country. And then that became apparent we weren't going to be able to do that with COVID. So I'm glad that Sarah and I have been collaborating on different poetry events. And so this just seems like a really fitting place to have this. And I want to thank the poet Tina Cane, the Poet Laureate from Rhode Island, for being here, and Alicia Ostriker, the Poet Laureate from my home state of New York, where I was born and raised. So I'm going to share a screen in a minute just to show you a couple of things about the new issue if you haven't received it yet. But the issue contains there will be 5 issues, each one with 10 poet laureates. And for this group, we chose the poet laureates randomly through a surrealist chance game. And for each issue, we're going to have a different way of choosing them. And we'll put that in the acknowledgement. And with each one, I'll write a new introduction. But for this issue, of course, we have Tina and Alicia, and we also have Dasha Kelly Hamilton from Wisconsin, and Julie Kane from Louisiana, Grace Cavallari from Maryland, Jackie Shelton Green from North Carolina, Alexandra Perry from our sister state, New Hampshire, Ennis Mojani from Oregon, Luisa Igloria from Virginia, and Huskar Medina from Kansas. And some of the visual artists that we featured, one is Clark Derby, who is a Vermont artist, and he's done some covers in the past for Green Mountains Review, and Elizabeth Ciano and Ty Williams, of course, who did the cover art. So I wanted to thank all of those people as well. Let me share this with you briefly so then we can get onto the poets. But here is the cover art, and you'll see that it says edition 1 of 5, so that you can be looking forward to the 4 other ones, and you'll get a box set at the end. And then this is some of the artwork by the artist Ty Williams. And there's some pictures of me that Michael's son Eli Jagger, who's a magnificent photographer, took of me. We made these little round cards with all the poet laureates' names on them, and I randomly picked them. And that day there was a snowstorm, so we went out in my field and did some silly pictures. And then you'll see here's Tina, beautiful Tina's picture with her beautiful essay on mercy. I just love that piece. But I'm trying to go sideways here, but you'll see a map of the United States, and the red dots are the featured poets in this issue. And then you'll see the names of the poets there. So just give you a little glimpse of the design. I just really love the design here. And let's see, I think Alicia's, I just want to show Alicia's too. And I'm happy to answer any questions. There's some of the beautiful artwork. There's Alexandra and Elizabeth Ciano, Jackie Shelton Green from North Carolina. And Byron was really into doing some new things with the typography, and I really, hats off to the poets for their flexibility with that. He wanted to bring a new look to the page. There's some more by Ty Williams. And then there's Julie Cane from Louisiana. And here we go, Kansas. I was so delighted to get some of his poems. He had, I think it was 2 or was it maybe even 3 Thanksgivings ago, a beautiful Thanksgiving poem in the New York Times. I don't know if any of you saw it. It was heartbreaking. And I was so excited to get to have some of his poems in here. And Dasha Kelly Hamilton from Wisconsin. And it was just, and here's Alicia Ostriker. So let me stop the share. So I really appreciate everyone being here, and I really would love to, oh good, Ben Alshire is here. He is one of our poetry editors. I'm glad he could join us tonight too. So thank you everyone, and without further ado, I'll pass it back to Sarah to introduce our readers. Thanks.
Our first poet laureate reading for us tonight was born and raised in New York City. Tina Cane serves as the Poet Laureate of Rhode Island, where she is the founder and director of Writers in the Schools, Rhode Island. Her poems and translations have appeared in numerous publications, including the Literary Review, Spinning Jenny, Tupelo Quarterly, Jubliat, and The Common. Tina is the author of The Fifth Thought, Dear Elena, Letters for Elena Ferrante, Poems with Art by Esther Solandaz, Once More with Feeling, and Body of Work. In 2016, Tina received the Fellowship Merit Award in Poetry from the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. She was also a 2020 Poet Laureate Fellow with the Academy of American Poets and is the curator of the distance reading series, Poetry is Bread. I love that series. Thanks for doing that series, Tina. Her debut novel in verse for young adults, Alma Press's Play, was released in September 2021, and her new poetry collection, Year of the Murder Hornet, is forthcoming from Belize Books in May 2022. That's coming right up. Without further ado, I would love to turn it over to Tina.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Elizabeth, for this beautiful issue. As I was saying in the green room before we were live, this is such a wonderful invitation for me because the Mother-Child Papers by Alicia Ostriker had a real impact on me when I was in my 20s, and I found that book. And so it's just, and I was saying I didn't have children at that time, so I wasn't quite sure what its hold was on me. Probably a little bit political and a little mysterious, but now I know. And actually, I found this great line, which I scoured the book for. I know now because there's this line on page 45. She's talking about motherhood, and she says, because who can bear the joy that hurts nobody, the dazzling circuit of contact without dominance. And that really says a lot to me. So thank you. So I feel blessed to be here, and I'm going to read, I'm going to start by reading some poems from this book that's coming out in May called Year of the Murder Hornet. And then I'll read a couple of poems that are in the issue. Can someone give me a thumbs up if you can hear me well? Okay, so this poem is called Year of the Murder Hornet. It's the title poem of my new book. Year of the Murder Hornet. Year of the cloud of pollen that chased me to my car across the supermarket parking lot. Year I was overpowered by flowering magnolia petals in a windstorm while walking home. Year of the murder hornet and coronavirus and weather as a system that shaped each day in a way that felt different from the past. Year during which you understood how the neighborhood you grew up in shaped the way you say friend. How the word childhood is the start of a sentence that has no end until you aren't the one saying it anymore. Year of grown-ups with their gravity, making everything a question or a fragment, depending on their personal weather, whether some of them are green or deep as trees of your imagining. Year when the way trees speak with each other about each other was more essential than the shade they gave. Year to try to live like trees, upright, yielding, seeking sunlight and silent languages. Year, I got a book in the mail about house cleaning as a joke from another poet regarding a poem of mine about life being hard and people's constant quest on the internet to make things easier. Year, the cover of the book read, introducing your household heroes, regular products with multiple abilities. How multiple abilities sounded more like an affliction than a capacity. Year of nights, I lost sleep. Year my mind cradled me. And actually that person in the poem who sent me the book is another poet laureate, Mary Ruffel, who was referring to a poem of mine. We're pen pals, and she sends me funny gifts and I send her things. And so she sent me this secondhand book on house cleaning. So I'm also going to read this poem called Shelter in Place, which is in the new book. I think it's the first poem I wrote when we were in the very initial shocking phase of the pandemic. Shelter in place. Schools are shuttered. Everything is canceled and my body has become an extension of my house. This shift is strange, but not entirely unfamiliar. The way a cardinal's home is a disordered stick bomb just about captures how I feel. How the mother bird uses her shape as a template to form her nest, shoving sticks together in a fit of random engineering. Randoming would be the verb, I guess, or jamming as it applies to me, a steady state of hysteresis in which the applied pressure changes the ensemble, in which the structure bounces back, but not completely. I've been thinking of ways to speak to my children about fear, how to be adaptive. I want to tell them about finches, zebra finches, who are content in captivity and who, unlike robins, which favor mud as cement, make their nests from anything they find. Strips of paper or string, fibers from a coconut husk. I want to stress that these elements the finches assemble seem haphazardly placed, but behave collectively. How there's a logic buried deep in the mother building her nest, which is a story of the nature of her body as every child's first home. That we don't struggle alone as the architects of our days, that nature will continue to amaze us in ways we don't expect. So in this book, there's several essay poems, and I think I was reading a lot of Lydia Davis, who I love. She has these books of essays. And then I was also writing some essays for this Providence Journal column that I have with my Poet Laureate post. And then I was also thinking about poems as little systems of thought with like arguments in them. So I made these essay poems. And this one is, it's called Essay on Poetics or Early Morning Texting with Orlando. I have a friend, poet Orlando White, and he lives really far away and I only see him like once every 2 years. But we text because he's up late and I'm up early and there's a time zone difference. So we text and we talk about poetry while I make breakfast for my kids. So this poem is actually a direct transcription of a texting conversation. Essay on Poetics or Early Morning Texting with Orlando. I'm having trouble writing poetry, he wrote, trouble being a poetry writer. I don't know, I said, write notes of sound, notes of mystery, see what comes. Geese flying, brakes screeching, boots crunching snow on a path, I said. Do you recall the last time the light of shadow reflected off your skin, he asked. In the morning, I said, stretching in bed. Low light, we exist, he wrote, because of light. As light, he said. Sound is light's cousin, I replied. Shadow has a sound of whispering, shadows vibrate like voices, he wrote. Like bird bones are hollow, by the way, I said. Sound like wind, I added. Wind moving, he wrote, against the fabric of skin. Feeling wind, the epitome of being in the moment. We agreed, breath is wind. We said, write it down. I said, see what the shadow gives. Our breath imitates wind, he wrote, the crux of it, us as wind. messages in our ears long before the ringing messages of purpose. He said, mystery of purpose. I noted humility of purpose, or mystery fabric of soul, he wrote. Hella ora yours, he said. LOL poetics of geography and self-shadow of words on the page I typed. In person, he said. Insomnia, I said. Sorry. Oh well, he said. Soon. And then I was saying earlier that Tango Eisen Martin, who's the current poet laureate of San Francisco, is a friend and he's brilliant, so look him up. But he's a native San Francisco person. I'm a native New Yorker, and so we both have an interest in gentrification. So I wrote this poem after reading something that he had written about gentrification. And I'm half Chinese and half a bunch of other things. And I think this poem also has to do with halfness. And then I also think it has to do with like unwitting participation in gentrification and essay on gentrification. Gentrification means I have arrived in a manner only half foreseen as half of me claims culprit or lays claim to my neighborhoods and stoops, spanning shambles to the ramblings of my education, meaning I know all about espresso and the benefits of self-expression, meaning I still trip myself up as reflex to tradition, for a long line of providing comfort constitutes survival prior to mine. If property is still an interest to protect, it also interests me in other ways, meaning I spend my days sweeping the floor, sometimes writing, sometimes imagining a table strewn with pheasant and clattering plates, where a feast takes place in my absence, where plans for repaving move forward without my input or my permission. As I envisioned the wave of a hand prompting someone to pass the bread to someone who likes their wine cool, their butter soft and lightly salted, someone akin to me who warms each pat with her breath, a hint of bitter ancestors on it. So here's a poem that's in the issue, and it's called Treatise on My Mouth. And I wrote it for Fiona Hill, who was like the Russian expert who testified at the impeachment. And so I was writing a lot of political speech poems at that time that were like personal political. And so this is one of them. And a lot of the phrases in here are directly from her testimony. Treatise on my mouth. Turns out I am chargé d'affaires of my own mouth, of my real speech, though I sometimes think I am just being emotionally concise, that my powers of constraint are not about protecting my own interests, but instead entail poetry. But we'll let your mouth be the judge of that. I am sure there's a test or an app. I should probably ask my kids for whom my policy is to never be alarmist, rather to appear as a fact witness to our lives so that I can tell them what they were like when they were little. To be a regular channel of love is my intention, for I am here to avoid long-term conflict while propagating a narrative of truth by means of my one and only mouth, worthy of attention. I am ready to answer your questions. Then I'll read Essay on Mercy, which is also the issue. And then I'm going to finish with a long poem from the new book. Essay on Mercy. It's all management before mercy for the suits at the rallies and for those alone in the ICU. Not a single mask to reuse, even for the mothers. Grieving in advance is intense, an anguish akin to combat, which it said feels like the second before a car wreck, only all the time. A single prescient moment right before impact tenses the body for eternity, bruises the psyche, and rewrites the system to run solely on adrenaline. But mourning is not war, and Antigone was not her brother. She sought to bury Polynices because ritual is everything. So a warrior she became. Still, mythology continues to bewilder, as if life doesn't train us for death. It all remains grim if we don't see small mercies in our midst, the lessons we might miss, etc. Once when I was young, kissing a boy I didn't love on a mattress in a floor through off 10th Avenue, I had the feeling I was falling through time. It was then, only then, that life wasn't about saving things, at least not mine. So read this long poem called Of All Things, and it's in Year of the Murder Hornet, but I also think it's going to be the first poem of my next book, which is called Search Engine. And it's about like getting DNA results that like are completely shocking in your life and that whole thing. So of all things, the Dead Sea is dying, and here I am. I still have hands with which to work and live, and every day I believe I can become something different. Most days I walk the woods, ready for the green, lucid vibrations of all things to find me, as I think and move past saplings without killing them. I know all things must die in their own time, so I keep my hands to myself, leaving only with what I brought, adding only this delicate dispatch to the images I store of evergreen California or Ashbury's chorus of trees, a stash of small prayers and promises I make to myself about potentiality. Like one day I'll see the redwoods of all things, like one day I'll write a book about lived experience and the power of expression, about experience as an expression of power, or power as expressed potential. In the interim, I hoard my authority of all things the way a library stores knowledge, which untapped as sap beneath bark exists all the same. So yes, like me, a tree needs no witness to prove its existence. But whatever the question, I will always answer, it is what it is. If you ask, why do I begin with death of all things here with the dying sea? I'd say it also has to do with a postcard Mary sent me of a sketch her husband did. A nihilist hopscotch grid of all things, words like if only, have tos, don'ts, knows, can'ts, written in the little squares, which reminded me of what Sean said about my poem, not being ready. Or was it the poet? On Strathmore Imperial Cold Press, Mary wrote, I thought you, whereas I thought no, but also yes. Then stepping outside myself, I took a photo of puffy white clouds of all things against a flat blue sky. So it goes, I wrote on the caption line, meaning the world moves on despite our myriad grievances, meaning movement hurts, whereas clouds weigh 1,000,000 pounds and make magnificence look easy. Movement hurts is also how I described a police cruiser of all things consumed by flames back in summer when the world was a ball of pain and even time off felt burdensome. The world burdened as it was, what it is, pattern and practice, innocuous as wishbones of all things I pluck from chickens, boil clean and place along the sill in my kitchen. Who notices, I wonder, the trivial otherness of others besides psychologists and poets? It takes courage to be a person most of the time. Pattern and practice universal as cruelty of all things, simple as apple pie. One man saying, I wear your scorn with pride, while another man tells America, I'm proud to deserve to die. Oh, tired overtures of equivalency, if context is everything, let's admit only trees of all things are truly honest. The way they display their seasons so nakedly while stars in the sky keep emitting their light even long after they've died. Of all things, night grips me with its cluster of yearning and concerns. In the low light of a ghost stream, I learn to love my concerns. Of all things, yearn to lavish them like a slaughter of lovers. I've been using the word attendant a lot, not from the French act of waiting, but meaning related or connected to matters of the heart and mind, as in a constellation of attendant issues. But I find if I stop thinking and just feel, it really is about the waiting. Sunlight and its attendant warmth, findings and their attendant fallout, fall and its attendant leaflessness. And Jesus, of all things, turns out is also about the waiting, plus mystery, rising, rising, risen. What with Easter come and gone this year was just one long metaphor. Who is anyone without the people they love? my son scrawled on a sheet of stray loose leaf. Maybe I'm in it for the fragments of all things, shallow convictions, uncertain substance, words my dad wrote in a speckled notebook I found beneath his bed after his death. Fragments, Mozart, Mendelssohn, Puccini, Haydn, Symphony Number 51, thoughts about Gatsby of all things. Who is anyone? Cheyenne Diner, 33rd and 9th, Meatball Parm, 275, a dozen pit stops in Hell's Kitchen. I say father here when I should say fathers, since there were others I never even knew. The first one was Caucasian and fought in Vietnam, which meant they didn't make him play the Viet Cong of all things during war games at Fort Dix, like they did that Chinese man, who was not my father either. But still, he returned unspared. After 2 tours, sat speechless in a chair, unable to form words around memories of all things or the people he loved. Or my other dad, the one with the notebook, born in the county of Kings near the Bay of Sheep in the middle of the woods of all things, if the woods had looked like the street across from Ebbets Field, where he spent his boyhood praying for balls to clear the walls so he could take one home to put under his pillow with his radio tuned to the game. Maybe I'm in it for the mystery of all things, fragments of me, Anatolian or Greek, and other father strands intertwined with mine, imagined inheritance, inscrutable as a crest of no lineage, useless as all my ancient armor, as science in the face of faith. I say fathers, but when the definition has to do with presence, I say Father, who art in heaven, by which I mean nothing but the singular propulsion of my beloved poetries. Maybe I mean my darkest teenage reveries of all things, caught between graffitied cars on the D train. Maybe that's what I'm in it for, how smoking or holding my breath felt the same as I clutched the rattling chains for balance of all things. Entering each station from the darkened tunnels was like daybreaking every 4 minutes, some squalid revelation in the time it took to finish a cigarette. My palms sometimes smelling of smoke and metal, of all things, metal always smelling like blood. Thank you.
Woo-hoo!
Woo!
Yeah, let's give Tina a round of applause. If you'd like to unmute or just in your little video box. All right. Well, I'd like to shift to our second reader tonight. Alicia Ostriker has published 19 collections of poetry, been twice nominated for the National Book Award, and has twice received the National Jewish Book Award for Poetry, among other honors. As a critic, she is the author of the now classic Stealing the Language, The Emergence of Women's Poetry in America, and other books on poetry and on the Bible, notably The Nakedness of the Fathers, Biblical Visions and Revisions. Her most recent collections of poems are Waiting for the Light and The Volcano and After, Selected and New Poems, 2002 to 2019. Her poems have been translated into numerous languages, including Hebrew and Arabic. She was New York State Poet Laureate 2018 to 2019 and a Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets. We have a lot of huge fans of your work here in the room tonight. Thank you so much for being here, and I've turned the floor over to you.
Sarah, thank you so much for inviting me. This is so far this evening is over the top. And I want to say, Liz, Tina, this was an incredible reading with so many moments that I resonated with. And I'll just mention one thing, and that is the title of All Things and the wonderful doubleness of it. I love phrases that mean two opposite things at the same time. And the way of all things is an invitation, like a Whitmanic invitation to include everything. But it also is like a phrase that could be a ladylike surprise. Oh, of all things. And so it's as if you are combining Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson. Well, what an idea. Anyway, gorgeous reading. Thank you. So I'll read some poems from the issue and some poems from a book that has a whole suite of New York City poems in it. So for start, Americans, we all came from somewhere else. When the memory of this fact blows away, it's like closing a shop at 5 p.m., yanking down the iron grate, fearful of looters and arsonists. We cover the mind with maps, strap it in with schedules, look at strangers and forget to see the journey in their eyes. Amnesiac nation, nation of the tax exempt and of the unpaid parking ticket. What makes us so forgetful? What I mean by somewhere else is some other continent from which we traveled by boat or jet or desperate rail or bleeding feet. And what I mean by somewhere else is also where the beloved touched me. Before I was born, the beloved touched me and let me go. Here's a little teeny New York City poem on the subway. I appreciate the courtesy of New Yorkers. When hunky guys on the subway offer me their seats, which they did twice yesterday, I like to think I remind them of their mothers in a good way. And then when I ask if I can take their pictures with my cell phone, mostly they look shy. Then they say yes. July afternoon to an absent friend. The storm we have been waiting for all day seems to have passed by. The air is moist in my backyard, the hammock comfortable. 100-foot tall, slender pine above me sways and creaks. One of these winters it will fall. Don't ask what I am reading. What matters is the sunlight, the breeze, the birds whipping past. By now, I imagine you having a beer or a glass of Chardonnay and a peach. But this morning, I imagined you bent over your garden, your gloved hands thick in the soil, your heart singing in its cage, your pansies blushing. Sorry about my missing voice. The mystery. This is a little longer. The mystery of our time is the addiction to violence. I understand the blossoms returning to dirt in August, but not this. I understand the dying of the light, but not the shooting in school after school, not the arson in churches, synagogues, mosques, that seems to produce a special glee, sometimes disguised as horror. Open it, like a box with another box inside it, and inside that one another. What is it? What is it? The spike of pleasure, also among those who merely watched the film or the video with a kind of reverence. 2, I did not want to say the screaming baby makes the mother and the older brother want to kill it. 3, in the subway today, 2 veterans went through the car asking for money or food. They said they were homeless. They said they served us in Afghanistan and Iraq. They said they had post-traumatic stress syndrome. I wanted to scream like a hyena. Those were 2 useless wars. I mean, those wars were evil. They were criminal. And my husband, sitting across from me, wanted to scream, those men were hired killers. We looked at our laps. as if we were carrying knitting. We did not want to cause more suffering. We looked at the other passengers, as one always does, but we did not know what they thought. Between 72nd and Times Square, nobody gave those vets a single thing. And another little poem for George Floyd. In college, I argued with a boy I had a crush on. All human life was sacred, I said. He laughed, and I was angry, but I still had a crush on him. And most of my quarrels now are with myself, the heart that still believes in progress, and that all human life is sacred, as my mother said, versus the head that says, look at the facts, look at the facts. So, because I'm representing New York this evening, I'd like to read some poems from this book, Waiting for the Light, which I began when my husband and I moved back to New York City, where we were both born and grew up. After 50 years in Princeton, New Jersey, which was very nice. But what I really wanted was not things that were very nice. I wanted New York. So when we moved back and were living on the Upper West Side, I started I started taking pictures, some of which are in this book, and I started writing poems just about the few blocks around my new home, my neighborhood. August morning, Upper Broadway. As the body of the beloved is a window through which we behold the blackness and vastness of space, pulsing with stars, and as the man on the corner with his fruit stand is a window, and the cherries, blackberries, raspberries, avocados, and carrots are a rose window, like the one in Chartres, yes, or the one in Paris, through which light floods from the other world, the pure one, stabbing tourists with malicious, abundant joy. Though the man is tired in the summer heat and reads his newspaper listlessly without passion, and people pass his stand buying nothing. Let us call this scene a window looking out, not at a paradise, but as a paradise might be if we had eyes to see. The women in their swaying dresses, the season's fruit, the babies in their strollers infinitely soft, clear window after clear window. So that's the first poem I wrote in my new old home. And I liked it, but there was something missing from it. It was maybe too lyrical. Well, you can't be too lyrical, but there was something missing. And I realized that something about what made me so excited to be where I was had to do with the excess of energy and with the fact that I at first was perplexed by the fact that that if I walked a block from my home on West Side Avenue up to Broadway, everybody's speaking Spanish. And then I realized that when my grandparents came to the city, they were all speaking Yiddish. So it's all the same impulse and the same reason for coming to New York, or set of reasons that that wish for a better life. The light. What is the birthplace of the light that stabs me with joy? And what is the difference between avocados sold on the street by a young man conceived in Delhi and avocados sold in the West Side market by cornrow girls? I am anyhow afloat in tides of Puerto Rican, Cuban, Mexican, West Indian Spanish, wavelets of Urdu, swelling like oceans, sweating like jackhammers, rasping like crows, calling out in the West Side market, the Rite Aid, and every other shop on the street. ¿Por qué no comprendes? You don't own the city anymore. The city belongs and has always belonged to its shoals of exiles, crashing ashore in foaming, salty droplets. Como no, grinita, with their dances and their grandmothers, with their drinking and their violence, and their burning yearning for dignity and smelling money. What is the joy? Is it those lamps of light, those babies in their strollers, those avocados with their dark green pebbled rinds shining from inside? 2 for $4 in the West Side market and 3 for $4 from the cart? Joy like white light between the dollar bills? Is it those volleys of light fired by ancestors who remember tenements, the sweatshops, the war, who supposed their children's children would be rich and free? So I'll just read one more because we want time for Q&A. Manhattan. I was asking for something specific and perfect for my city, says Walt, lover of crowds, praiser of trades and occupations, celebrant of the daily tide of immigrants. And I too seek the perfect image of you. You mothering harbor, you royal sewer, you finger inside the sky, you dangling dream deferred, you queer hideout, you incubator of Jewish jazz. You who exist as a landing field for helicopters, you whose laughter is heartless. You digest dudes who crave to be big shots, celebrities, hedge fund managers, who like to show off and be bad, who get a kick from champagne. I am looking for a toaster in the hardware store. And here, 2 women stand behind a counter, minding their cash registers. In their red apron uniforms. A points to B and says, you know what she did Saturday? She went skinny dipping. I have to wonder where. B looks pleased with herself. The Harlem River. Really? It's where show-off boys used to dive. And we giggling girls used to just watch those bad boys. Times do change. B says, I have to let my bad girl out sometimes. Thank you.
Woo!
Let's all turn our mics on. Yeah. Woo!
Yeah.
Bravo. Woohoo. Thank you, readers. Gorgeous, gorgeous.
I'm always because of poetry readings, there's such a lag behind the poems that people read and what they're working on currently. So I don't know if either of you would want to talk about kind of upcoming projects that you're doing or a current in progress project that you're doing.
Well, I've been doing 2 things lately. For 2 years of the plague, I couldn't write any poetry at all. I was trying to write something called In the Bardo, which was just about how nothing everything was. But then I wanted to write I wrote an essay on poetry in the city because I realized that about the same time as I was writing poetry about the city, I realized that the city never was a topic for poetry the way it is now. You know what I mean? Poetry was about love and death and sorrow and nature and God, but never about the city, because poetry was supposed to be elevated and cities were considered low. And there was kind of class prejudice against them until Whitman and Baudelaire. So I was writing an essay about the history of poetry in the city, which now the Writer's Chronicle is going to publish, and I'm so happy about that. That's one thing I've been doing. And finally, the poetry came back, and it's all about aging and death. Two fun topics.
Inevitable topics, right? Just inevitable. I'm writing, I read that poem of all things, which is in this new book that's coming out in May, but which once I wrote it, I thought, well, oh, that's actually like part of the germination process of some poems I have for this new book that I'm trying to write called Search Engine, which is, this many fathers that I refer to. I think that like I'm always interested in the personal and the political, and how I don't think they're actually that distinguishable. Like I think that people's political views are often shot through the prism of their personal pain, and it's whatever degree of alienation or privilege or access or capacity for joy, all of those things, whatever those conditions are within a person, I think translate into their political beliefs in many ways. So I think that this new book is about thinking that the biological father I thought was my biological father is not my biological father. I was raised by a stepdad who was like a great dad. He was my dad, but then I don't think anybody knew that the person who we thought was my biological father, who was in Vietnam when I was born, actually is not. And I don't know who the real dude is. So it's about that, but I think that it's also about fact versus fiction, or this climate that we're in, where the truth is under siege and facts are apparently up for debate and interpretation. Even when you're staring at actual hard data, it can be completely refuted only because someone wants it to be. I'm thinking about fact, fiction, mythology, personal mythology, and then also, personal histories, things that people, families believe about themselves, the way that we construct ourselves, whether or not that has to do with fact at all. Anyway, so that's what I'm kind of thinking about. But I'm really scurrying around. I'm writing a second YA novel in verse. I was asked to write a second one following this other YA novel in verse that came out in September. And actually, Alicia, you mentioned Emily Dickinson, and it has to do with Emily Dickinson. It has to do with a 13-year-old Chinese girl who's an adopted. She's being raised by a Caucasian family in New York at the tail end of the pandemic, but she's feeling very alienated and isolated, and she discovers the work of Emily Dickinson. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm 2/3 through it, but it's agonizing, and I'm having a very difficult time writing this book. So send me good vibes.
You're 2/3 through?
Yeah.
I have always found that when I have a big project that I think is going to change the world, and I start out with great energy, when I'm 2/3 through, I think this is too hard. I can't do it at all.
I know. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I never thought it was going to change the world, but I didn't anticipate here's the thing. I didn't anticipate how difficult it would be to try and write using Emily Dickinson's work for an audience of maybe 12 to 13-year-olds without glossing over or giving short shrift to Emily Dickinson, you know, and then also making it too dark, because you know, her kind of obsessions are time and death, but so are this girl is also named Emily, and she's living through a pandemic and she's 13, so her obsessions are time and death like everybody else's who's lived through the past, you know, 2 years. So but what my real thing is like how to treat Dickinson with respect but make it accessible and not too dark for a kid. Anyway, enough said. I'll deal with it, but that's what I'm doing. Where I'm at.
So cool to hear about all that. Thanks for telling us. So it's something I love about readings, like you can get like kind of a sneak peek of people's
I'm struck by how, because you've both been emphasizing, I guess especially Tina, about the darkness of our time. How do you both see this, those two things at once?
The darkness, and the other thing is what?
The hope, the joy,
Sure. In a sense, you can't have one without the other. Or you can't legitimately have one without the other.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you know, they need to, yes, you need to have both. They need to, I mean, you know, the only thing that can be gotten from what we've gone through in the last 2 years is some kind of perspective or sense of reprioritizing and taking stock and understanding what is important to us. And if you're always in peaceful times or in comfortable, safe conditions, then you know you really don't have that tension to reflect upon really anything. I mean, I think that's, you know, one of the cultural conditions of our country is, you know, as we can see with the way masks were handled and everything else. We are a young country who doesn't do well with discomfort. Everybody's worried about the gas prices, which, you know, for many people is it breaks their bank, but, you know, there really aren't any alternatives. So, you know, we're not that good at pivoting and making do. And when you don't have that ability, you know, you can't rebound as quickly. Between the pandemic and what's going on in Ukraine, you know, kind of hoping there is some kind of collective contemporary collective, because other generations certainly went through this in other cultures, but collective reckoning with not having everything at our disposal, not always being comfortable and having to cut back. These are, and those are conditions for art making too. You know, some great films are made under really, with a lot of constraint, a low budget. And then once that director gets a big budget, boy, all the creativity goes out the window and it's all bells and whistles. So these tensions are, you know, they're important. And I mean, like I say in the poem, of all things, it is what it is, you know, it's just, you know.
Sorry, I don't want to cut you off. There was one last question, and this will be the last question for the evening. And it's from Iris. And Iris is wondering if you both could talk about what you learned about the power of poetry through your work as poet laureates.
I've thought about the power of poetry ever since I started writing poetry. And maybe there was a slightly different tilt coming from being a poet laureate, but I think being made a poet laureate was a consequence of what I had been doing all along.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's true for Tina too.
Yeah, it is true, you know, because I was mostly working with youth through my Writers in the Schools program. And that's, I think, primarily how, you know, I came to be recognized as a person who might be, able to be a poet laureate. It was my community work. I think one thing, well, so here's the thing. I've been poet laureate for 5 years because I have a 5-year term, and my term was up in November, but because of the pandemic and a couple of changes in administration, I'm still poet laureate until further notice, which is fine by me. Like a Supreme Court justice, I'd be happy to do it. But one thing was the day that I got the call from the governor's office was the day before the 2016 election. So I had this day of fear and elation and trepidation and joy, and then the next day was the election, and then the next morning I woke up and was completely devastated and by Trump being elected, and it really sent me into a kind of a crisis of conscience, like, what am I going to do, go around reading my poems? Like, I really had this moment where, like, what can poetry do? It does nothing. Like God said, it does nothing. And after about not true, but I needed those days of complete crisis to say, well, I got to do what I can with what I have, and I've been given this tremendous opportunity and honor. So because I had a Providence Journal column space, I started kind of trying to write about politics, weaving in poetry, and I tried to make that more of an activist space than it had been used in the past, rather than like musing and kind of more take it sort of head on, but in a way that was diplomatic enough so that someone wouldn't put down the paper halfway through. But I also started thinking about structure. I do think a lot of good goes, because I do it, I go into schools and I do poetry with kids, and I do feel that if in one day, one child out of the 50 that I see has a thought that, so I say something that's generated some kind of, reflection on their part, that's a good day. But I started thinking more about structure because I was thinking about our country. And so I kind of approached the position as a public service position. Like, I was like, okay, well, I want to create a youth poet laureate program because it's a structural change that can stay beyond my tenure. And kids need role models, and need a younger, more energetic version of me to go out there and do this work. So I have 2 youth ambassadors every year for the last 4 years, and I just had 2 more come. And then I did the Poetry in Motion program from the New York City transit system onto the buses across the state in Rhode Island for the last 4 years. And that's because it's like a structural thing where it's almost like advertising. Like, if a person sees a poem every time you're sitting on a bus, it's gonna get into them. It's a very democratic vehicle, literally, to disseminate poetry. And so it changed my thinking in that way, because I felt so besieged by the fact that that was our president, that I felt probably more engaged in an urgent way than I might have otherwise. And then, so, but I mean, what it did show me too is, I mean, like you've said, Alicia, it's like poetry is everything, and then at the same time, like, it's only poetry, but it is everything, and it does feed people. And I was surprised to, people reach out to Poets Laureate, and people reach out to me all the time, and so it is heartening, actually, to know that people who aren't poets, who don't know a lot about poetry, who've never studied it, still feel compelled to turn to it instinctively.
Yeah. I would like to mention Auden saying poetry makes nothing happen is exactly wrong.
Yeah.
And a project that I had as poet laureate of the state of New York was looking at a poem which changed the meaning of New York and of America. And that poem is Emma Lazarus's Statue of Liberty poem. She was a well-known poet, and was asked if she would write something for this contest to raise money for the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. And at first she was not interested. And then a friend said, maybe you could write something that would be meaningful to all these people that you care so much about. And these people that Emma Lazarus at the time was advocating for were all the immigrants who many of whom were stuck. And she was advocating for health and for jobs and for diet. She wrote this poem for a statue that, when it was given to us, had nothing whatsoever to do with immigration. It was a gift from the French people to the American people, celebrating liberty, meaning we were two countries that had rebelled against monarchy and were trading with each other and so forth. And that poem changed the meaning of the Statue of Liberty, changed the meaning of the Port of New York City, changed the meaning of America, so that it became normal to say we are a country of immigrants, and to say that with pride. So that was really the foundation of my project on poetry in the city. And that went on to a project with putting out a call for people to translate that poem into their mother tongues, people who came from somewhere else and whose mother tongue was some other language. And Mihaela Moskolyuk, who was my colleague at Drew University, and I put out this call, and we ultimately got around 50 different languages, along with comments by each translator on what the immigrant experience meant to them or to their family. And the idea was to have those languages out there, so that although the poem of Lazarus's says, here's the golden door, we know that many people now, and as always in the past, prefer a wall to a door. But we want to emphasize the door.
Well, I think that's a really lovely note to end on, that poetry opens so many doors for all of us. Liz, do you want to say any last words?
Poetry is a door, and it keeps leading to other doors. Keep opening them and keep going through the open doors. And thank you to both readers, Tina and Alicia. Thank you for your work, for your time and your energy, and what you do for poetry and what you do with your own work and your activism. And I'm just so proud to have you both here at this reading series, and I wish you all the best. And I'm a big admirer of you both, and it's nice to spend time with you and everybody else here tonight. So thank you all for coming, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you. This was a great pleasure. Thank you.